especially languages. And so I mentioned the Yoruba today, but I mean, we could spend an entire week playing the music, Congolese music that exists in Cuba today. Palo, yuca, makuta, garabato, and that's a whole different language structure, and so forth. Now, so then we said that, of course, there are Spaniards in Cuba, white Europeans, and black Africans, and they come together in Cuba, and then they create creole forms. What do we mean by creole? Mixed. Something that it doesn't exist in Africa. For example, the bata drums obviously come from Nigeria, but the way that the Cubans play bata drums is completely different than the way Nigerians play bata drums. I'm a fairly serious student of Cuban bata drumming, and I listened to a tape of Nigerian bata drumming, and I don't have the slightest idea what the hell's going on. None. I can't find a downbeat. You asked me about the downbeat a minute. I can't find a downbeat. I have no idea what's going on. In fact, half the time, it sounds like people are just literally randomly playing, except that they just randomly played this and 6 other people just came in and 4 people started to dance. So obviously, it's not random. Just to me, it's random. So we should be very clear about this. So the point is that even the bata drumming in Cuba is Creole in the sense that the Nigerians kind of, some of the Nigerians that I met actually kind of laughed when I was in Cuba and the Cubans played for them, because in Nigeria, like I said, they'll play up to 6 bata drums. So it's a lot easier to generate this amount of sound with 6 people than with 3. And the Nigerians were laughing at them, going, "Man, you guys got to work too hard, man. You know, get some more guys in here." And the Cubans were like, you know. And of course, language as well. The Cubans will sing whatever. Wolenche, wolenche, wolenche baido la, and the Nigerians start laughing at them. And they say, "Well, we know what you're singing, but the actual words are, you know, the way Chaucer would probably do with us. You know, he would go, 'What are you? Come on, that's not what the word is.'" So things change and adapt. But in terms of real Creole music, what we're talking about is stuff that exists only in Cuba. It's not in Europe, and it's not in Africa. It's the coming together of these 2 traditions that creates its own completely unique style. And the first style that we want to talk about in terms of percussion, when we leave the completely African stuff, is a style that he mentioned before. Danzon. The danzon is important to us as percussionists and as musicians because this does not exist without the danzon. Now, these are called, that's right, and they come from the timpani. If it's 1860 and you live in Havana and you're white and it's Sunday afternoon, where do you go? Sunday afternoon. Pardon me?
Opera.
I'm sorry?
Opera.
Opera. Probably not in Cuba. Maybe close.
Right.
But more like it's hot out. Park.
Okay.
And what's in the park? The 19th Regiment, the military band. It's going to play. You get in the buggy and you go down and you sit in the park, and the military band is playing. And what's their instrumentation?
Drums and pipes and brasses.
Brass, a lot of brass. Orchestral, think orchestral, woodwinds, trumpets, etc. Timpani, and eventually, and they're playing once it stops being military music per se, and it becomes like orchestra music. In the 19th century, particularly throughout the Caribbean, they are playing music that is basically rooted in the French danza and the contradanza and classical music forms from Europe. And that went to the New World, not just Cuba now, but throughout Latin America, and became sort of the rhythmic roots of a lot of this music became, I had another stick here, didn't I? Oh. Hey, man. Became what we call, I'm now going to do a little bit of writing, the cinquillo, meaning 5. Little 5. That's right, better. Little 5. And the little 5 looks like this. Although they wrote it in cut time, I'm going to write it. Zang, gun, 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 run, gun, 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 run, gun, 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 gun. Tango from Argentina, the habanera, which was a rhythm that went throughout Latin America, was all based on dun, 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 dun. The Cubans clavified the cinquillo. Just coined a new verb, just made up a clavify. To clavify. And they did this. Bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. Do you see that this sorry, I didn't quite line it up. That these notes are simply sewn clave. Can you guys see this thing?
No. Does that stuff go up more? High bottom.
How am I doing?
Better.
The Cubans took this pattern, added that, and you can see that clave is now inside this pattern. Son clave. This, for those, very quickly, this is son clave. And this is what we call rumba clave. All that rumba clave is takes a third note, moves it back a half of a beat. Instead of bum, 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 it makes it bum, 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 bum. Everybody cool with this? Do we have son clave in American music?
Mm-hmm.
We sure do. What do we call it?
Bo diddly.
Pardon me? Yeah. No, that's what we call it. We call it the Bo Diddley beat. That's exactly what we call it. It's just that we shuffle it. Duck, 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 duck. I know a cat named Way Out Willie. Bump, 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 bump. Now, it's not an accident that that comes from New Orleans. If you know the relationship of New Orleans to the Caribbean, then you know that that's not an accident. What's funny to me is how much music is sort of culturally bound. If I walk up to somebody on the street and I say, please would you clap 3-2 son clave for me? Nobody has any idea what you're talking about. Then if you say, it goes like this. 9 times out of 10, what do you get? You get any manner of things but what you actually ask them to clap. Walk up to any person of my generation, regardless of color, and you say, I know a cat named Way Out Willie, and they all go bump, 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 bump. I just find these things interesting. I don't know, there's no hidden meaning there. I just find that interesting. You can, I guess, mystify stuff sometimes. In any event, this rhythm became what we call the danzon. That's a D. And as the music moved indoors and the timpani became too unwieldy and too big, the timbal, or the paila, was created. to play that. This did not exist. Just this. And the timbalero plays what we call the baqueteo. B-A-Q-U-E-T-E-O. Baqueteo. Ba, 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 ra, da, da, da. That is the paseo, which is the required part of a danzon. The paseo, that figure, is not only the intro to a danzon, it's also the ending. And the danzon was very through composed. That is to say, there's no call and response. Unlike the African music, which always has call and response in it, the danzon has, first of all, it's instrumental music, but also there's no montuno, there's no ostinato pattern. It's just a whole bunch of melody stuff. And then at the end of the last melody, you're done. The danzon groups featured the only, in addition to the timbal, the only instrument native to the island of Cuba that survives today, the güiro. And the güiro, I don't have a güiro stick here, but it doubles that pattern. It plays the danzon pattern along with the baqueteo. The original danzon orchestras were güiro, timbal, and woodwinds, brass. Then it became bass, piano, violins, and flute when it really went indoors. No conga drum. No bangos, no bongos, no none of that. Timbal, güiro, through composed, sort of very classical music sounding. Now, the first danzon was written in 1879. So this is sort of the time frame that you want to be thinking about. The other Creole form of music that we want to talk about that's probably predated the danzon, but and I don't, maybe somebody here knows when, I don't know. But that's much more African at its root, but is still Creole, doesn't exist in Africa, doesn't exist in Spain, would be what? Let's say mid-19th century for now. It's a fairly obvious answer.
Rumba.
Exactly. Because rumba is Creole. It's much more African probably than European, but still Creole. First of all, it has clave in it. In fact, it has to have clave in it, or it's not rumba. Basic rumba. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Now, 3 drums because there's a quinto.